Well, good evening, and welcome. And I want to thank you so much for joining me this evening, this beautiful Saturday evening in the UK, Saturday, the 19th of the 4th, 2025. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you, those who are joining me on Facebook, those who are joining me on YouTube, and those who are joining me also on TikTok. Well, tonight is normally a talking sip Saturday night, but I've sort of amalgamated and changed the game by talking about the Constitution. Constitution masterclass on the Constitution, because if you remember a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, while I was having the discussion, I just made a declaration that you know what, instead of saying that the Constitution is taken out of the classroom in Jamaica, might as well just say we can do it here on TikTok, on Facebook, because we've got a majority of people who are on social media, so might as well just bring the whole aspect of the studies to the people. And I always say they take civics out of the classroom, but I say we bring the civics to the people, because the people are the people who are in the classroom. You know what I'm trying to say? And we have had the first show a few weeks ago, where we had Miss Joanne Simpson. She came on, and that was the 22nd of March. And she sort of set the overview, author and publisher of the book Civics. And on a couple of weeks ago, the 5th of March, I had Uh, Mr. Not 5th of March. Yeah. A couple of weeks ago, we had masterclass with civics and the citizenship with Matunda McCullough, former acting public defender in Jamaica. And this evening, I'm going to be having Miss Professor Rosalie Hamilton to speak on the show. But I want to say, first of all, that the relationship between civics and the Jamaican Constitution is foundational to the nation's democratic life. Civics, as a study of the rights and duties of citizenship, provides Jamaicans with the knowledge and skills to participate meaningfully in public affairs. The Jamaican Constitution, established at independence in 1962, some will question and say whether it was independent or not, or the process of independence started in 1962, is a supreme law that sets out the structure of government, the roles of the executive, legislature, and judiciary, and enshrines fundamental rights and freedoms such as protection from arbitrary arrest, freedom of movement, protection from discrimination. Understanding civics equips. I repeat, understanding civics equips, and the word civics come from the word civicus, equips citizens to engage with these constitutional principles, ensuring that the exercise of political power is bounded by clear rules and that the rights of all Jamaicans are protected. However, the relationship between civics and the Constitution is not without challenges. We are in the process of having constitutional reforms, removing the king as the head of state, and to either have an executive president or a ceremonial president, and they're going through a raft of changes. Jamaica constitutional history is marked by tensions inherited from the colonial past. But anyhow, we won't go any further with that. Tonight, I'll be having Miss Professor Rosalie Hamilton tonight, and she's going to be setting out the stage in regards to Constitution and the civics. And Professor Rosalie Hamilton is the founding director, Institute of Law and Economics. Over the past 30 years, has given a voice to the voiceless through her academic writing and advocacy to support micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise, MSMEs, eliminate gender-based violence, build climate resilience, protect human rights, and improve good governance, especially through constitutional reform. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm going to bring in Professor Rosalie Hamilton. Well, good evening, Professor. How are you doing?
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and it's an honor always having you here as well. And thank you for being the third lecturer in this series of civics, masterclass on civics, which we agree and we all understand this is so important for Jamaica and my duty and one of my vision is to give back to Jamaica, and this is what I'm doing. So thank you for this opportunity, Professor Hamilton.
And thank you for doing this awesome
Mm.
approach to civics
Yeah,
online, not waiting for anybody.
yeah,
I love it. Thank you so much for it. Good. All right. Well, you want me to jump in? I'll definitely jump in. I wanted to start with your vision of a better Jamaica, right? And I know you have a lot of great
yes,
imagery about Jamaica. And I want to invite the audience to, just take a minute. There's a lot of things happening in the world today. All of us, many of us are stressed and so on. Just close your eyes if you want. Just imagine that favorite spot when you visit Jamaica. You feel good, you feel, connected. Just imagine Jamaica you want. What could that look like? We could think about it in its parts. Let's think about the kind of politics that we want. What kind of politics do we want? We want politics with no corruption, no tribal politics, no intolerance and intimidation. A politics that's free and fair. Nobody not buying no votes, right? A governance arrangement that's good, that's participatory, that gives us an opportunity to deepen our democracy. What kind of economy do we want? We all want a first-class economy, right? One that stands tall in a rapidly changing global marketplace, where we're educated and we can, bring to bear, technologically enabled goods and services that gives us a competitive edge, an economy whose environment supports micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, especially, and that we achieve the kind of full employment where we can have decent wage and equality of pay. Those are some of the economic ideals. And when we think about our society, our ideal is to have a society in which there's no crime or very little, where we feel safe, right? A healthy society, a society where we protect our environment, where we have protections for children and our elderly especially, where there's no discrimination and where love and respect for each other abounds. That's the kind of ideal Jamaica that we want. So I can say that all that I've said to you is what we have defined in our Vision 2030. Right? We've, as a nation, took some time a few years ago and we came up with that vision. And the question we continue to ask ourselves is, will we achieve it? Can we achieve it? Whose responsibility is it to achieve it? And these questions are being discussed as we speak. Many of us simply think that, it's the government to do it. That's why we vote them into office. That's why we're paying them. And we don't really have a role or responsibility. I suggest that this is a responsibility of all of us. It is Fui Jamaica. It belongs to all of us. And some of us kind of see ourselves as literally squatting on this land because we don't feel we own it, right? But I ask the question, if you really see yourself as an owner of Jamaica, then with ownership are rights and responsibilities. And I see those as our civic responsibility. And it is it's the Constitution that ultimately defines these rights and responsibilities, as well as the structure of government that we want to protect those rights and uphold those rights. And civic education teaches us what is inside that Constitution. And so that's the tie-in with the Constitution and civics. And I want to inject an important element in there, which is civic responsibility. Now, in understanding our Constitution, then, it's very important that in our civics education, the Constitution is key. And it's key because it is through the lens of our Constitution we get a proper understanding of what we're trying to achieve with the way we organize government and our relationship with each other, the rights and freedoms in a democracy. So that core idea is very important. The idea that we're trying to build a democracy, it's embedded in the Constitution, and the structure of government is set up to deliver that. The arms of government, the legislature, the executive, the judiciary, and all of these rights and freedoms and more is embodied in the Constitution. So we can think about better Jamaica as the goal that we're going after, and the Constitution as our foundational roots. And civics is a way to understand those roots, to make the connections, right? And that the civic responsibility puts the information and understanding we get from civics into action in order to achieve the outcomes that we want. Now, because there is so much to do, there's so much action, these actions tend to be organized by civic organizations, civil society organizations, community-based organizations, NGOs, the church sometimes, service clubs, advocacy groups, all kinds of individuals, leaders, community leaders. You take on this responsibility and kind of help to organize us as we take on what we consider to be civic responsibility. And if your next slide, I think SYLBOURNE talks, I tried to get an AI to give us an image of a tree, right? Where Better Jamaica is right at the top, if you go to the next slide. And right at the roots is the civic and the Constitution. And civic responsibility is quite in between. It's kind of like the trunk. It's like the path to this better Jamaica, right? Graphics not that great, but I tried to get AI to help me. But I'll try to get some better graphics next time. All right, but the reason I wanted the concept of a tree is that your next slide talks about this famous quote from Marcus Garvey. I think everybody knows it or ought to know it. A people without knowledge of its past is like a tree without roots. And so, like Constitution as the roots to the tree we're trying to build a better Jamaica, right? The Constitution also has a past. And in studying the Constitution, we ought not to see it simply as a set of rules. It is our supreme rules that guide the nation. But we ought to see it as grounded in a historical, social, and economic experience that made that experience possible. Remember, we were part of a British colony that didn't have a written constitution. And so the constitutional norms and habits and rules guided the society nonetheless. And I'd like to see it as a 500-year journey, right? And through the lens of our people, we can think about a constitution as rooted in this fight for freedom, equity, human rights, self-determination, all of this to improve the social and economic conditions of our life. That's the struggle. And so I immediately make an important link between the Constitution and our social and economic outcomes. Because fundamentally, it is those legal arrangements that set the foundation. That's the roots of how we achieve the Jamaica that we want. And we can go through that very quickly. We know Columbus started, of course, the indigenous people was right here before Columbus came. But from 1494, there's been a war, a fight for freedom. And, that continued through the Maroon Wars, the Baptist Wars, the Morant Day Rebellion, and so on, right up to our Constitution. It's been a battle. We weren't given a Constitution. We had to then, and we're still fighting for a Constitution that's making sense for who we are and what we want, the rights and the freedoms that we want. And importantly, in 1962, what we got was a Constitution, which was an order in council from the British legal system. It's the British parliamentary arrangement that gave us this Constitution. And it is still today an order in council, a product of the British parliamentary arrangement and not the product of our parliament. And part of that important discussion we're having now is to ensure that we have a Constitution that comes from our parliament. And we can also think about the history in terms of what has happened since our 1962 Constitution. And I'll just quickly, that next slide goes through a long list, won't go into the details now. I know we don't have much time, but we can talk about the post-independence start of the constitutional reform all the way back in 1977. And there's been all kinds of developments to date. And of course, the latest being the tabling of a Constitution Amendment Republic Bill in December last year. So we have a whole history. All of that must be taught in civics. If we're really going to understand this link between the Constitution and civics, we have to go back to that history. So that is part of the material that we need to understand. So let's get to the core ideas though. What really is a constitution? We've said it already. It's a supreme law, and it provides a framework for government, how government functions, and it acts in terms of how it acts to make law and policy and so on. And importantly, it has these rights and freedoms. It establishes all the key principles and the structures and the relationships we want to help us to organize a society that we want to live in. Now, remember, we may take democracy for granted, and I know what is happening in the US is not missing anybody. And therefore, that's not something we can take for granted because we can see how quickly what we consider to be the normal way we organize society in a democratic way as fleeting, as changing. And so depending on what we want as an outcome, our constitution will help us. So if we want a democratic republic, which is what we say we're changing our constitution to achieve, a republic, then we must anchor it in these rights and freedoms, and we must protect these rights and freedoms. And we must ensure that there's an adequate mechanism for good governance, right? So those are the key ideas that we want. So why then are we reforming that? Well, I went quickly through our history to say this constitution was never designed for us. Up to 1962, we got a constitution that worked very well for the British. It was very centralized. All the power is in the hands of the governor. And the governor made law, executed the law, did everything to run the society in the way he, the British, and the elite, the ruling elite, could benefit from. So that's what we've had. Now, there are some major flaws that were embedded in that design in 1962. And I can talk about them very quickly. It's the concentration of power in the hands of the prime minister and the cabinet. So we've inherited a very top-down structure of government. We can talk about the authoritarian leadership that we've inherited as a result. And there are lots of evidence to how that was a deliberate design in the Constitution. We saw the discussions and their writings to tell us about the discussions in the Legislative Council where they contemplated the kind of constitution that they wanted. So we have authoritarian leadership by design. And that weakens our democracy and our economy. And we also have inadequate mechanisms for people's voices to be heard. Remember back then, the idea is that only a handful of people are good enough, smart enough, bright enough to run the society. So there are no mechanisms to hear from all of us what we want. And even in shaping that constitution, our voices were not there. And of course, we perpetuated this colonial judicial structure. So we can identify these 4 things as key things that are flaws in our constitution that we must change. And so if we think about changing the constitution, we can think about it through the lens of, we want a better structure of government that can enable good governance. And when we talk about good governance, we can think about them through the lens of the UN's definition of what is embedded in good governance. And it's to ensure accountability and transparency, through effective oversight of executive decisions, enable participatory, inclusive governance that is consensus oriented. We can enable efficient and responsive use of our resources, following the rule of law. All of those things are what we want if we want a government that's run in terms of good governance. And if we do that, we expect that it will improve the standard of living, and the average Jamaicans can feel the impact of this constitutional change. So if you scroll down a couple of slides, you'll see that I've listed both those inadequate mechanisms, those 4 things, and I've also identified the 3 areas that we want to think about when we're thinking about good governance. And so the next slide speaks to the reforms that are now being discussed among many of us as part of the Advocates Network, the Jamaica Council of Churches. Many civil society organizations are supporting this effort to do some core things, to restructure Parliament, mainly by enhancing our oversight and looking again at the number of the cabinet, the members of cabinet versus those who are the non-executive members of the legislature. And we want to shift that number around to have a balance that will enable us to, the legislator, to their work. So there's no more dominance of the executive in parliamentary decisions. That's one way to think about that arrangement. And oversight is important to provide an effective check on the executive. We also want mechanisms to strengthen our voices. And so we want petitions and other kinds of mechanisms that will help us to have a say in the decisions that affect us directly. So we want to improve the governance arrangement, democratize Senate. Some of us are talking about an elected Senate, right? And also a Senate that has an important role in strengthening not just governance, but development, and to provide spatial equity so that all parts of Jamaica, not just the cities, can be developed. So that way of restructuring Parliament is one thing, empowering our communities, ensuring that our communities have rights to have a say, rights to shape the budget that impacts their lives, and so on, to reform local government beyond the most recent legislation that we have. And importantly, to decolonize our constitution. Now, I say all of this to say these are issues that must turn up in our civics education. Because remember, our constitution is the roots, is the foundation on which we build our knowledge about civics and what we need to do to get the kind of Jamaica that we want. Now, assuming we can all agree that, these are the constitutional changes that we want, then it comes back to whose responsibility is it? Right? Whose responsibility? Do we wait for the government to change the constitution for us? Is that how it works in a democracy? If we want a government for the people, by the people, of the people, if that's the kind of government that we want, then the people must be central to this discussion about how we restructure our government. And so I suggest that it is our civic responsibility to engage discussions around the Constitution. And I want to commend you, SYLBOURNE, because, you are taking this responsibility serious. You are organizing sessions, you're organizing civics and so on. You understand that it is your responsibility. If we want a democracy, I want to say it that way, because some of us may want to perpetuate this kind of dictatorial approach to governance, where you vote in a prime minister and the prime minister drives everything, right? And we don't have a say. Some people may be comfortable with that, but I want to suggest that most of us, consistent with that long 500-year history, want freedom, want self-determination, want to have a say in the decisions that affect our lives. And so I suggest that when we think about our civic responsibility, remember that's the branch, now that's the trunk of the tree. Those are the branches that's going to get us that freedom. It is our civic responsibility through these organizations, the things we do, that will get us there. And we have to be active. We have to be informed about the kinds of changes that we want. There's a lot of information out there on the internet, so we shouldn't go into these conversations as if we don't know anything, right? We have to do a lot of self-learning. That's what Marcus Garvey did, right? Didn't rely on the institutions and the schooling because he knew he was miseducated. And so teach yourself and constructively engage to create the constitution that you want, to create the republic that you want, to create Philly Republic. That's how I see it. All right. And so I think that we have to take this on as a civic responsibility. That is what is required in a democracy. A democracy requires active citizens, not passive citizens. And I want to suggest to the audience that if you are observing what is happening in the US, you're seeing live democracy at work. You're seeing the people of America standing up every day and say, we don't like what we see. And for those who like what they see, they're standing up as well, right? And so we are all going to discuss, debate, all guided by the rule of law, right? But we also have to work out the terms on which we get the kind of rule of law that we want. And that's part of our discussion as well. Do we continue to want, we continue to see and to perpetuate an arrangement where our final decisions are made outside of our jurisdiction, outside of a framework in which we've agreed we want to live, right? And so that raises questions about, a Caribbean court and so on. All of that is part of this discussion. But I want to hone in a bit on the civic responsibility and to describe that as a kind of moral obligation we have if we want to live in a society of good governance, right? That's kind of how I like to think about civic responsibility. And your next slide talks about the list of things that we can think about when we talk about this moral responsibility. Registering to vote, for example, and voting is a moral responsibility. I want to quickly say that in some countries, it is a law. It is a law to vote, and if you don't vote, you will be fined or seriously punished. Now, we don't want to get there. We're seeing the decline in voter turnout in Jamaica. And it's a lot of that, I think, has to do with this absence of understanding that we have to play a role to create the democracy we want. Yes, we are frustrated because the two main political parties have not delivered what we wanted. And a lot of polls have told us that, right? But it doesn't mean that we stop fighting. It doesn't mean we stop engaging in creating and improving this democracy. So it doesn't mean that when we vote in our elected representatives that we sit back and allow them to do whatever they want to do. We have to hold them accountable. So that's part of the civic responsibility. You don't hire somebody to work in your business, say, and then you just allow them to do what they want to do. You're going to monitor to make sure that they don't mash up your business, right? And so that's what you have to do. You have to see that you're hiring people to run your country, right? And you have to monitor what they do. And if you don't like what they do, they must know that. And so engage in conversations about the kind of constitution we want is a moral, civic obligation that we have. And I think that we ought to note that when we talk about upholding the Constitution at any moment in time, it is our supreme law. And so we have to abide by it. That's the deal that we make with our citizens if we want to live in a democracy, that we have to live by the rule of law. And so that's a civic duty. That's not a kind of moral, that's a legal obligation we have. That's very important to note. But having set the law, we still have a moral obligation to rethink it, to refine it, to improve it, to defend it, right? And all of these is what we want to describe as civic responsibility. And so we can also think about things like what SYLBOURNE is doing, creating a platform for dialogue, an online platform for dialogue that helps us in the engagement we need to change the Constitution, to determine whether we want to stand for that right and freedom that we now have, right? All of that is important. We also have to encourage and organize this civic education. It is so important, SYLBOURNE, what you're doing to encourage us to think about civics. And you're creating that platform in which all of us can engage and talk about what civics really is, what we ought to have in civics education. And we can do the education right here, and we're doing it. So again, I really, really want to thank you, because I think this is a great, great initiative. But many of us can also organize community groups or just groups among your friends and family to engage the conversation about the importance of civic responsibility and the importance of our Constitution. We have a lot of work to do to build trust so that we can work together and collaborate in this process, because, we do have this tendency to want to do it alone because we can't trust the people around us. But we can fix that. We can consciously build trusting relationships. And that must be anchored on good ethics and good governance principles and the kind of people we are. Integrity, those things matter if we want to build trust so that we can collaborate with each other. And so I suggest that civic responsibility also requires a personal responsibility to be trustworthy, to have integrity, to be willing to lead by example, to live transparent lives, so that we don't have nothing hiding in the closet, that because everything today, this is a world in which you ought to live in a transparent way, because everything on social media, right? Even your most intimate acts can get on social media if you're not careful, right? That's the world we live in. And so I suggest that we have to take this responsibility personally and live it. Lead by example. It's not a trivial point when we question the integrity of our members of parliament. They are the ones we give our power to, and we ask them to use that power to help all of us. And when they personally enrich themselves, and when they give that power to their friends, that is not right. And so I suggest that we have to practice this idea of personal responsibility so that when we take office, it's natural, it's normal. The people can trust you because we know you can live that way. And I like a quote by Bob Marley, and I've put this on the next slide because Bob Marley said it very simply. He said, the greatness of a man, and I know it means a woman too, right? The greatness of a man or a woman is not in the wealth that he or she acquires, but in his or her integrity, right? And he says, the ability to impact and affect those around you positively. This is a profound statement. And for those of us who want to see Bob Marley as a national hero, this is one of the great quotes that I think that we ought to remember him for. And so when he's talking about the ability to affect us, those around us, he's also talking about social consciousness, right? The idea that we have to think about others. And for those of us who, go to church and are very religious, we understand that that is the obligation to love your neighbor as yourself, right? We need all hands on board. We need to work together. We need to collaborate. That's how we get the kind of inclusive decision making that's required to build and strengthen and deepen this democracy. But we need that social consciousness. We need that sense of I and I, the concept of Ubuntu. We are all interconnected. So I am because you are because I am. These ideas are key because those are the foundational ideas of social consciousness. And it is when we have this consciousness and we build a collaborative arrangement and we can work together, we can not only transform our constitution, reform the constitution in the way we want, but we ultimately, through the collaboration, build that better Jamaica. That better Jamaica is not just about what the government does. It's fundamentally about what we do and how we collaborate with our governments to achieve the outcomes that we want. And I think as we try to build this republic, it's what we want, not what the government wants. It's what we, the people of Jamaica, want. It's Fiwi Republic that we're creating. So I'm going to wrap up now, SYLBOURNE, and I just want to highlight that the discussion really is suggesting that our constitution is key to a good civics education. And civic responsibility really puts civics into action. It really cements the idea because we learn all these things in civics, and it's knowledge and information that we acquire, but we have to do something with it. And what we do with it can be guided through this responsibility we have to put the things we know into action. And we have to organize, work collaboratively. We ought not to think that we have all the answers, because there's a lot of learning by doing. And it has to be that way because we have to learn how to work with each other. And we don't know how our brothers and sisters and our neighbors think. We think we do sometimes, but we don't always. But this is when we dialogue and we work together and so on, that you really get to know people. So we learn as we go, and we come up with the solutions that we think can best enable us to get to that better Jamaica. And of course, I ended on the note that there's a personal responsibility we have. We have to improve these core values, build that social consciousness, and I think together we can create that better Jamaica that we envision, and we can get to that vision 2030.
Now, thank you so much, Professor. That was very powerful, and it's a reminder that we have a personal responsibility wherever we are. Even though right here I'm in the UK, but Jamaica never leaves my heart. I say
it includes the diaspora. Yeah, absolutely.
I say to people all the while when we're having discussions and they say, "You guys are foreign and don't know what's going on yard." You know what I mean? But that's not the case, you know. And I want to sort of elaborate on this point here, though, is the civic responsibility and civics not in school or so. But why do you think that Jamaicans, in a way, are not moving towards topics like these, which are very important, especially when you got social media, you got all these different things that is pulling people together in different ways?
I think it's a very early understanding of how important these things are.
Yeah.
Remember there are different ways to think about civics, so we can almost rote learn these things that we teach in
Mm.
civics. But I think the point about the Constitution is to nail down the idea that when we think about our government, how the government is shaped and formed is in the
Yes.
Constitution. When we
Mm.
think about our prime minister, the roles, responsibilities of that prime minister is in the Constitution.
Is there a
When we
job description in? Is there a job description in the Constitution?
job declaration is in the
Oh
Constitution.
wow.
We have important provisions about, and that's where we start. We may want to
Yeah.
add things because the Constitution, remember, was shaped in 1962. So there
Yes.
are things today that we may want,
Mm.
right? But the foundational ideas of the job description is in the Constitution.
Yes.
And so what I'm saying, when you think about most everything you're learning in civics, you can find that in the Constitution. So it's a core part. And I think when people understand not just the civics, because remember, civics is the information. It's now the responsibility that also must be taught.
Mm.
That we
Mm.
have a responsibility as citizens in our democracy to act, to do things, to actively engage, to create the society what we want. And I think when we learn that, it then becomes okay. I
Yeah.
can't sit back. A whole generation, it's fair to say that a whole generation since 1962 have grown up waiting for the government to act. We vote and
Yes.
we wait because we expect that the government is going to carry out its promises. And they all give us very flowery promises to do magic, right?
Yes.
And we sit back and wait, because we think that's their job. And we don't understand a very important role that we have. We must
Mm.
hold them accountable. We've given them our power, all of us who bother to participate, and even
Yes.
those who don't, we have given up our power. And I want to also say this, Sylvan, that
Mm.
many of us grew up in Jamaica with this idea that politics dirty, so you must stay away from it, right? And it suits those who've made the decision to be part of the political process to perpetuate that idea. Because the more most of us stay away from it and
Yes.
don't hold them accountable, the more they can do anything and get away with it.
So
Think
what we
of
are saying, in a way is like the political class tend to capitalize on that sort of narrative in a sense.
absolutely. And in fact, we don't hear enough of the appeals for citizens to get engaged. What we hear is the people we want to vote for us, we want to engage them. And there's a lot of work to encourage, the people who want to vote for our party.
Yes. Just got a froze there, but okay. Yeah.
Yes. But yes, I
Sorry, go
was
ahead.
saying though that there's not enough conversation even among us in civil society who are not necessarily advocating for a particular political party. There's not enough discussion about why we need to be active in the political process and why we need to vote, why we need to have a say. Because if you don't, we cannot shape and influence the outcomes. So if there's nothing else your audience gets from me today,
Yes.
I want to make that point. Because so many of us have grown up on the idea that politics is dirty. Well,
Yes.
is it dirty when it shapes everything you do,
Yes.
how you live in Jamaica? The environment in which you live in is shaped by this political process, grounded in some laws that are rooted in our Constitution.
But before I go on, we got a couple of comments from a couple of persons. But one of the things I like to do is change in certain narratives. And with the season that we're in Jamaica, they call it the silly season.
Yes.
And when I hear the silly season, and this is a silly season, people just say, oh, let them be, let them kill up themselves or whatever like that. But it's a wrong concept. I like your
idea. It's a serious season.
Yeah, I changed it as a no, this is a very serious season that everyone needs to take a part. And here's this person here that says that the average Jamaican person see no change in their circumstance, regardless of what, who is in office. Do you believe that is a sort of thinking also? So people say, well, I can't bother. It don't make no difference. It makes
It's
no
an
sense.
important part of the thinking, and I would suggest it's because the people who want to see the change are not doing anything to make that change. They're not trying, they're not pushing the society. And let me also say this, the very people who vote in whatever political party they want in office ought to be at the forefront of criticizing the government when it doesn't do what we want it to do. Because we don't put, none of us, I don't think, vote knowingly to put a party in power to engage in corrupt practices.
Yes.
Right? And so when you see corruption, and I don't think anybody in good conscience can say since our independence that both political parties have not been involved in corrupt practices, right? It's there, it's around, we're seeing it, right? And that, in some cases that has been prosecuted, in some cases that it has been exposed, but in most cases, it goes unpunished. But we know that these kinds of practices exist. We should stand up if we want a different kind of politics and we want a different kind of society. And so, I think the idea that it doesn't matter which party is in power, that makes sense if you are not actively engaged in the process, if you're sitting back waiting for the parties to deliver the outcome you want. I suggest, however, that if you actively engage, you will get different outcomes. I have not seen any political party and any administration who completely ignores the people when they stand up and organize and say they don't like things. A simple example that involved the diaspora that I like to use is what happened with our festival song in our 60th year. Remember?
Yes,
There was no festival song. The government said it was, but people said, no. We need a festival song.
yes,
Right? And we said, and we were all over social media, and before you know it, our festival song was found.
yes.
I remember there was a policy under the PNP administration where fees went up, right? The bank fees went up. And there was a loud cry. It was under Peter Phillips. There was a loud cry. No. Bank fees too high, and so on and so on and so on. And the bank, before that budget debate was finished, the bank fees were taken off. Now, there are lots of debates about, how it came back in different ways and so on and so on. Yeah, but for that moment, we saw change. And I'm suggesting that the politics to be viable, political parties must respond. The government must respond to the people, and they can't ignore us forever. And so I say we don't always win. And remember, we don't vote robots into power.
Yes.
And they just listen to us and don't think. They're not. That's not how it goes. We vote representatives to help us to think through the solutions, and they have a voice as well.
Yeah.
But they can't ignore us, not if we're standing firm on the issues we believe in and we work together. So I want to say to the Jamaicans who are so cynical that they don't bother to vote because no matter on whichever side it is, that's because you've ignored your role. And I think when you start to throw your role in, you will see different outcomes.
So the point that Temi Adejon is saying there, which is a three-pronged sort of statement, it is true that politicians capitalize on the apathy of the citizens. At the same time, politics is very dirty and sometimes dangerous. But she completes it by saying, but nothing changes if nobody is engaged or involved.
Absolutely. And let me say that politics is no more dirty than corruption in our society, in our professions, in our school system, in our police force, or wherever it exists. And we don't have a clean, we don't have a corrupt politics or a dirty politics and a clean society. It doesn't work that way, right? The dirtiness we see in politics, as we call it, is what we see across our society everywhere. There's no clean space that we see perfection. We see even corruption and dirty behavior in the church. There's so many instances we've heard of abuse in the church. So it exists all over. But we don't paint a negative picture of all of these institutions. There are good people in the church. There are good people in the police force. There are good people in the schools and in the professions. And there are good people in politics.
Yes. So therefore, I guess what we're saying then, in order for things to happen, people have to show an interest and to be active. And this is what programs like these do. And for I was with Minister Mala, who fought recently in London, and she said there's some different educational things that they're going to be doing on the portals or so like that. But you can bring the what do you call it? You can bring something to whatever, but they have to move towards it. People have to react to it, isn't it?
Yes,
you can do as much as you want.
But react and be a proactive, because it's not just reaction, it's also proaction. I want to say I'm part of a advocates network, and ever since the Prime Minister said that we're going to move on, right? Remember that famous statement?
Yeah.
Many of us have agreed with him, supported this initiative, supported the idea of a meaningful and comprehensive reform that we've never had since 1962, right?
Yes.
We've agreed that this is important, and we have taken it upon ourselves to start. You're part of that, SYLBOURNE, for months now, years.
Yeah.
Actually, I can name it. It's since 2022, to be precise. Right? When that statement was made, shortly after that, we started to organize. In fact, we've organized online sessions with our Minister Malcolm Ford. Right? So many of us have seen and understood that we have a responsibility, and we're trying our best to play that to carry out that responsibility. And it includes the education, the engagement, the dialogue with our citizens. I've been to communities on my own through the Institute of Law and Economics, in collaboration with others, and engage in communities about what is it that you want, where is your voice, right? So all of us can do our part, and I think when we have a saying in Jamaica, SYLBOURNE, I know you've been away for a long time, but I'm sure you don't forget this one. Yeah. One cook a full basket.
Yeah, man. One cook a full basket.
Yeah.
All right, so make a muckle. Take your hand, make fashion.
Yeah. So we just one, and eventually we get there.
Yes.
Because ultimately, for us to have any meaningful constitutional reform, we have to forge consensus. And enough of us have to agree on the core idea. We will never get everything we want in that constitution. It's not possible.
Yes.
Right? Because there's so many of us. But we can get some core ideas. And we feel strongly that we have to think again about that structure. This centralized approach to governance is not working. Will not work. We have had 500 years of that. Right?
Yes.
That's what colonial dominance meant. Right? We want mechanisms to have a say. We want to engage. We want decentralized governance, that our communities can be empowered and have a real say in how the communities are organized. And many of you in the diaspora, I know, want that, because you do so much to support those communities.
Yes.
And when we fix up those communities and we empower them, you will be part of that. So you have a place to come home to.
Definitely. Well, Professor, I want to thank you so much for coming on tonight. We're just reaching up to the hour now. And, for the discussion and for the lecture on Constitution and civics and Constitution in this masterclass. And ladies and gentlemen, this is very important, that we all play a part, and we have to be proactive. As someone finished the proverb, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. but this time we're going to ensure that Jamaicans really drink from the food of the water of civics.
I think the idea that the power is in our hands is perhaps the most profound one, that we have to
Yes,
recognize that we have the power, and
yes.
all of us can come together and make it happen.
I like that. The one about the power is in your hands, and the
I,
fact that people should always remember and to be reminded that they are the employers of the political electorate, of the persons who are elected. Let me say the
Absolutely.
persons who are elected, that
The
they are
power of the people is
power of the
greater than the people in power.
yes. And as someone said a while ago, the power is in the hands of the people who participate with purposeful action. And
Absolutely.
Gretel Bradford, thank you for that. I'm going to actually put that as one of my status, most definitely, as well. Any last word for you, Professor? Somebody said Miss Hamilton should come on more often. Well, she's a regular on the show.
I come on as soon as long as as soon. Wait, have I ever said you no? Have I ever
You
told you
never
no?
said no yet.
Always find time for you. But I
Yes,
want my last words is really to commend you, Sylvan, because I
yes.
really think it's so important the work that you're doing,
Mm,
and you demonstrate, you illustrate power in action. You
yes,
you you demonstrate, you're illustrating civic responsibility. You're not waiting for anybody to tell you to use your platform to educate, to ensure that we understand civics, civic education, and our responsibility to change society. So I want to thank you, thank you,
mm,
thank you. And I want to thank your listeners for taking the time to join us. And I really hope that we've learned something, all of us together, and that we
yes.
can take what we've learned, put it into action, and make a difference to create that
Make it.
better Jamaica that we want.
And what is it? A Fiwi Jamaica.
A Fiwi Jamaica and a
A
Fiwi
Fiwi,
Republic,
a
where we
Fiwi
set it
Republic.
up. We want
Yes,
to set
yes.
up a republic that belongs to all of we.
Yes, not just for a selected few, but everybody need to
Absolutely.
feel a part of the whole process. Professor, I want to thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day in Jamaica. Will you have sunshine there? It's midnight early to here in the UK.
Thank you. I'm
Okay,
going to send you some sunshine. Foo!
okay. I receive. I receive it. Thank you very
All
much.
the very best. Thank
Okay.
you.
All the best. Thank you. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for joining tonight, and thanks for Professor Rosalie Hamilton for sharing and for this lecture on civics and the Constitution. And just to let you know as well, on the 4th of May, I'll be having Miss Jeanette Calder. Jeanette Calder is the chief executive or director of JAMP, which is Jamaica Measuring Portal. She's going to be coming on and talk about civics and accountability and explain what she does. And I believe that in all different aspects of this whole civics, there's so many strands to it, which will be so exhaustive that I won't be able to complete this whole thing. I'll be having Mr. Simon Woolley, Lord Simon Woolley, former chair of Operation Black Vote. He's going to come on at some point to talk about it because, of course, we in the UK here we were Operation Black Vote looks at civic responsibility as to how the black voters in the UK can actually make a difference in different areas up to the in recent elections. So that was really fantastic. Now, people may be asking, what sort of material is there? And one of the key material which is out there is Miss Joan Simpson, who had written this book. She was the first guest on the show. That's Miss Joan Simpson, and the book is called New Vision Civics. New Vision Civics. You can actually purchase that book, which is a tool in the hands where you can use and you can actually read up and read more and understand more on civics. And their contact detail is as follows: to contact Joan Simpson. Joan Simpson. There's the detail which is running across there. I'll put it up also. There you are. You can actually order that book, New Vision Jamaica by Miss Joan Simpson, as I believe it is important that you get this tool in your hands as well. So I want to thank you so much for tonight. Let me just let it keep running. Yeah, so I just want to thank you so much for tonight, and let me hear your views. And remember to share this video. I'm going to be put. This is going to be on Spotify, Amazon, and RSS.com, and also on YouTube and also on Facebook as well. I think Facebook now started to take things down after maybe 30 days or so, but anyway, it's on YouTube. So thank you so much for your comments. And if I just look at the different comments here, you have free Jamaica is a mantra, right? Why is there non-Jamaican on the constitutional reform? We all need to pull all black nations together across the world again. Actually, I was just listening to France, and the president of France, Macron, was saying they did a bad deal. They did a wrong to Haiti when they asked Haiti to pay for their independence. People are asking what more are they going to do about that. But that is very interesting coming out of France. Bingo, very bright lady. Tune in, Temi Adejon. It starts with transparency, no more closed doors, constitution reform committee meetings. What's there to hide? I agree. It should be open, it should be transparent, and also there should be minutes as well that people can read to see what is happening, why the decisions are made, who made these decisions. Yes, the Privy Council has got to go. That is a big thing which is happening. Big discussion should be the CCJ. Why are you going to think about removing the king as the head of state and then actually retaining the King's Court, which is the Privy Council? Some say that no makes sense. Gretel Bruff, I love the concept of learning and creating spaces for dialogue on our constitutional reform. Definitely. And I encourage persons as well to start having the discussion in your home group, in talk civics, talk about the responsibility of citizens. Free Jamaica. Jamaica citizenry by and large has become apathetic to civics, hence a low voter turnout, for instance. And the average Jamaica person sees no change in their circumstance, regardless of what and who is in office. And then finally, Temiada Johnson, it is true that politicians capitalize on the apathy of citizens. And at the same time, politics is very dirty and sometimes dangerous, but nothing changes if nobody is engaged or involved. And that's the last word. Nothing changes if nobody is engaged or involved. And that is very important tonight. Hamilton, we should come back on that, definitely. Great show. Thank you, Temi. And good guests would like to see more of Dr. Hamilton. Well, thank you for that. I'll definitely reach out to her. And well, I've had a few shows with her. If you go on my YouTube channel and just type in Professor Rosalea Hamilton, you'll see a few very important discussions that we have had in the past, as much longer as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, have a fantastic night. And what should I say? Peace out. Have a good night, and God bless you, and enjoy the rest of this Saturday evening. And as I say, it's talk and sip, but we're talking about the Constitution reform. Remember to like and subscribe, and TikTok as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.